With Professor Hayes. Today we are going to make special chicken cacciatore, but I got a small chicken, so we're going to include a duck too, and so it's going to be duck chicken cacciatore. So slimy. Just add some seasonings, some more seasonings. Put it in our pan. Now we're ready to put this in the oven. We'll just set it over here for now. And now we're ready to fix a special salad to go with our cacciatore. I'm going to wipe this off first. So this is going to be a special salad. It's going to be celery and peppers. Don't mind the brown spot, it's okay. Okay. There you go. You could add a little seasoning if you like. A little dressing. And then once the chicken is done, you got yourself a very nice meal. Not really. What happened? Oh my goodness. So you're gonna tell me that I've contaminated my food? Oh darn. So she's stealing my thunder here, but exactly. Cross-contamination. So we're going to continue our discussion on food, but she's exactly right. First thing I did was, I took my hands and after handling the chicken, I brushed them on my apron here. So now everything that I've touched is going to have the chicken juice on it. And I took my rag and I wiped it off here. And of course, I didn't really get rid of any salmonella or anything that might have been on the cutting board. I took my salads and I transferred it and I continued to prepare my salad on the cutting board where the salmonella potentially could have been. So she's exactly right. Even though I may take my chicken and cook it up to the right temperature and kill all of the microbes that might be there, unless I'm cooking my salad as well, I'm going to be exposing the vegetables and stuff to bacteria. And so now when you eat this, you run the chance of making yourself sick. And you brought up another good point about having two cutting boards. You really want to try to keep your vegetable preparation separate from your meat preparation. So you can have a cutting board that you would do your chicken and beef preparation on, and then you would also have a cutting board that you might do your vegetables on. What we're talking about foodborne illnesses. And there are a couple of ways that we can expose ourselves to bacteria and to microbes that can cause these foodborne illnesses. One of the easiest ways is to cross-contaminate, like I demonstrated here. In most cases of food poisoning, foodborne illnesses, it happens because of unsanitary handling of the food, cross-contamination. Occasionally you can have it happen because of undercooked food. It's not uncommon for that to be the case as well. But in most cases you're talking about somebody that has done something to contaminate the food. Now, when we talk about foodborne illnesses, a lot of times people call it food poisoning. I got a bout of food poisoning, and so I can't make it to the test on Wednesday. And I have heard that actually. But there's a couple of ways that the poisoning can come about. It can be by way of a pathogen, or it could be by way of a toxin. Best way to, of course, avoid food poisoning is to have proper preparation, proper storage, proper handling techniques. We'll talk a little bit about those. But let's say a little bit about the types of poisoning that occur. First, we'll start with the toxin and talk about foodborne intoxications. A foodborne intoxication now is going to be the result of consumption of a toxin. So you have to eat the toxin. And in this case, we are talking about an exotoxin. So it's going to be something that the microbe is producing and secreting. Now, some microbes like Staphylococcus aureus they produce a toxin that is heat liable, or heat stable. Meaning that when we cook the toxin, it doesn't break down. The toxin that is produced causes vomiting and nausea, thrives in moist, rich foods, grows well at room temperature, and usually comes from Uncle Joe sampling the stew. Seriously, think about the practice in a lot of homes is to, you've prepared the meal, everybody's eaten, and so the food will sit out on the stove, and there'll be some snacking on the food throughout the night. Not everybody behaves that way, but occasionally, and especially when you have large get-togethers with family and stuff, the food sits out while people snack on it. Thanksgiving, Christmas, things like that. Well, now you've got this big pot of, let's say it's stew or something, that's sitting out, and it's been cooked and you've killed all the bacteria that's there. But Uncle Joe has this tendency to reach in there and grab chunks of meat, because, it's sitting there on the stove and he's nabbling at it. But Uncle Joe's not really good at cleaning his hands either. So he inoculates the stew with Staphylococcus aureus. Okay, now, you forget about the stew sitting on the stove, or it just sits there for a couple of hours at room temperature. Staph aureus is now growing and multiplying and producing the exotoxin. You eventually put the stew away, or maybe you come back and you heat it back up because you're going to start another meal with it. You put it in the microwave to heat it up or something like that. You can kill the bacteria, and likely do kill the bacteria, but the toxin's still there. And the toxin isn't destroyed by the heat. And so you eat the stew, you eat the toxin, you get sick. It causes you to vomit, be nauseous, maybe even diarrhea. That's a very common foodborne illness. A lot of fast food restaurants, the illnesses from fast food restaurants, a lot of times are a result of Staphylococcus aureus. Because think about fast food restaurants and coffee shops in general. If you've ever worked at one, they have a steam table or a hot table that's supposed to be maintained at a specific temperature to keep bacteria growth from happening. But it's very easy. That temperature is usually about 160 degrees. It's very easy for that temperature to drop down, say, to 120 degrees, especially if they're not monitoring it real well or something like that. They come in and they just turn it on and they put the food on there, so it takes a while for it to come up to temperature maybe. During this time, the bacteria are growing and producing this toxin. So a lot of times you can have the toxins show up in the foods, even though they're later heated to a proper temperature to kill all the bacteria, the toxin can still be there. One other type of microbe that produces a toxin is Clostridium botulinum. Now you're familiar with this microbe, I'm sure, causes botulism. Did I set my water somewhere? Sorry. So this one here also produces a toxin, an exotoxin. But in this case, this microbe's toxin is heat liable, meaning that it will be destroyed if it's cooked. This microbe produces a paralytic neurotoxin, so it causes the nerve, actually causes the muscles really to no longer contract. you're familiar with it in canning process. A lot of times if you don't get the stuff that you're canning up to the right pressure, right temperature, the endospores that Clostridium produces will survive the heating process, and then therefore they'll be able to grow in the preserves that you've produced, whatever it might have been that you canned, and then when you open that up and eat it, it can cause the illness. Any questions about these two?
So Staph aureus and Clostridium, those are the exotoxins
No, those are the bacteria. That's the name of the bacteria that produce the exotoxins. Okay, so Staphylococcus aureus produces an exotoxin, and Clostridium botulinum produces an exotoxin. Both of those cause a foodborne intoxication. So you're sick, not because of the microbe itself, because of the toxin that the microbe produced. Okay.
Those are also caused from dirty hands, because the Clostridium lives in soil, wasn't it?
The Clostridium does live in soil, and so a lot of times the Clostridium thing happens when you're canning tomatoes, or you're canning, vegetables or something like that.
From the garden.
Right, from the garden. And then, to can those things, you need to bring them up in a pressure cooker to a certain pressure and temperature to kill all of the endospores. And if you don't do that, those endospores will germinate at some point and can produce the toxin. So a lot of times home canning can be an issue if the pressure cooker isn't reaching temperature and pressure.
Okay, but it doesn't necessarily come from food and cans handling the food, but it's actually came in from the garden on
The Clostridium, you're right. The Clostridium likely is coming in on the foods from the soils, but the Staph aureus is probably coming from the handler. Yeah. So different sources for sure. In addition to intoxications, we can have foodborne infections. Now, foodborne infection then means that you are going to eat the bacteria. Consumption actually takes place. So in most cases, if you cook your food thoroughly, you're going to kill the microbe during cooking.